Pedigree Primer 2023. It is time for our annual Pedigree Handicapping show. Tonight, we're going to be joined by Hawkstone Bloodstock, Jessica Tugwell. She was a guest earlier this year, right around the Kentucky Derby time, and we specifically talked about some pedigree handicapping in regards to the Kentucky Derby and the Triple Crown and some of the popular pedigrees that everybody was kind of wondering about. And I thought I'd bring Jessica back and talk a little bit more about pedigree handicapping, take some questions from our viewers, and learn more about how Jessica looks at pedigrees from two different ways. There's pedigree analysis, and then there's pedigree handicapping. And we'll kind of let Jessica kind of lead the show here on how she kind of puts on two different hats when she's either handicapping races, when she's trying to judge some matings, when she's looking at the catalog and things like that. So you wanted to get more pedigree talk. The listeners get a lot of questions for this. So I'm going to bring in Jessica Tugwell of Hawkstone Bloodstock, and we're going to talk pedigrees, pedigree analysis, and pedigree handicapping tonight here on the show. Good evening and welcome, Jessica Tugwell.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yes. Looking forward to this. I think pedigree handicapping is one of those things that a lot of people have questions. Sometimes they're maybe afraid to raise their hand. I think sometimes, it's kind of like inside baseball talk where people think there's a lot of stuff really going on, but really, everybody kind of learns the same way. You Google some stuff, you look at horses, you look at catalogs, and I think people sometimes take the fun out of it by, just not having fun with it. And so that's kind of what I want to do on tonight's show is take a look at different pedigrees, pedigree analysis, pedigree handicapping. But first off, I want to give people a little bit of a background into what you are doing. And you are with Hawkstone Bloodstock, which is your own company. And let's talk about some of the things that you do, both with the blog and then some of the services you do as part of your pedigree analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started the blog at the beginning of the year. And basically the way it works is every other week I have a post for everybody, anyone who wants to read it. And then every other week I have a post that is paywalled for just paid subscribers. And those are going to usually be more deep dives, things like I'll do stallion analysis, I'll do picks from an upcoming auction, or lately I've been kind of looking at, like this week I did a analysis of a filly that's in for a claiming tag that I thought had a really interesting pedigree and could be an interesting broodmare prospect. So things like that for people who want to go a little bit deeper into pedigree stuff. And then, the free posts are a lot of times I'll just find like, okay, what horse won a stake this weekend that I can talk about? Or I did a deep dive on Sir Barton's pedigree and kind of historic pedigrees, or just whatever pedigree related topic kind of catches my interest that week. And then I also offer services for clients. I do sale shortlisting. I do individual hip analysis. I do matings basically whatever. I'll do stallion analysis. I have a really exciting stallion analysis project that I probably can't talk about, but I'm really excited about. Things like that, whatever someone needs a pedigree looked at in absurd depth, I can do that.
Now, when you mention stallion analysis, does that mean you're going to try to find mares that suit that stallion, or you're actually going to do a deep dive, like how is this progeny done type thing?
Yes, both. For one I did on my blog that is actually available, I opened it up for everyone to read because of how well it aged. I did an analysis back in January or February on Flame Away and the sire lines that I expected him to work well with, and pedigree influences that I thought would work well with him. And for example, the very first sire that I said I wanted to see him with was I wanted to see him get daughters of Sky Mesa. And he, of course, has that really nice filly Dreamfire out of a Sky Mesa mare, who I also was a highlighted horse on my blog for that OBS April sale. So that's kind of, right now it's more doing things for young stallions and trying to predict what they will work with in the future, but that is based on looking at their sire, their dam sire, and what's influences have worked with them.
You also went to a few sales last year, and you're you said you started roughly a little bit over a year ago now in August, really in the industry, and kind of just talk about that. What kind of spurred on the decision to go full time and really turn this into a career?
Well, it was kind of the realization that I could. I had moved to San Antonio, was just kind of doing gig work, and a gig of mine kind of fell through at the same time that my dog had a expensive vet bill, and it was July of last year, I think, because the catalog for the Saratoga sale had just come out, and I was kind of struggling, like, oh gosh, how am I going to come up with $1,500? So I put out on Twitter, just, hey, I'm offering pedigree analysis shortlisting services for the sale. And I had a pretty significant client, person in the industry, owner, reach out to me and ask for my assistance. And thanks to him, I realized that I know what I'm doing enough that I can actually do this full time. I mean, I've been following racing religiously since 2004, and especially over the last like 10 years or so, have really leaned into the pedigree aspect of it. So I just kind of decided that, I was lucky enough to be in a position where my housing was dealt with. So if I could make enough money to cover my bills, I could do it. And I decided, why not give it a try? And it's worked so far.
Yes, no, it's always good to hear a good origin story. And a lot of times you just have to kind of take the jump. I put a picture here of your welcome to Hawkstone Bloodstock. And yes, I highly recommend it. Like you mentioned, you've got some of the free topics. Around Breeders' Cup time, you did some pedigree handicapping on some of the 2-year-old races. You did a nice analysis of fierceness, I believe, after he won the juveniles. So, but you also do those, deep dives where I know you're always trying to work kind of 2-3 weeks in advance and come up with ideas to blog about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Try and have those kind of on top. Sometimes the pedigree, like, okay, what stakes horses I'm going to write about this week, I can kind of knock that out in an hour or two after the race. But especially for the big ones like the auction posts, those are definitely weeks in advance. I'm working on those and getting my short list together so that I can pick 5 or so horses that I want to talk about.
Let's dive into our topic tonight. We do have a comment from Richard. He says the Flameaways look like they can handle the turf as well.
Oh, absolutely. They'll run on anything, just like he did. He was a winner on dirt, turf, and synthetic. And with, the possibility of more synthetic surfaces in the future, Belmont's going to be putting in a synthetic track. Absolutely something to look for in a young sire.
Now, we will be taking people's questions tonight. If you have questions about pedigree handicapping and also just general questions for Jessica and what she looks at, any questions about her blog, we'll take those as well. Before we dive in, since we talked about Flameaway real quickly, what about Matoli? Looks like he's got a lot of winners. Few of them have been trained by Steve Asmussen, of course, who trained Matoli. Any thoughts on Matoli, or did you do any research on Matoli before his first crop hit the ground this summer?
Oh, of course. I mean, he's definitely solid. He was one I'm definitely was and still kind of am taking a little bit more of a wait and see approach with. I'm glad to see that he's having success because I really was a huge fan of Scenderea, and I'm a big fan of a lot of the pedigree elements that a Scenderea brings in, going back to that great mare Cosma, who also was the dam of Halo. So there's a lot of really interesting pedigree elements in Matoli's pedigree, and I'm excited about him. But I've just, Scenderea never really reproduced himself until a horse like Matoli. So he was one that I just wanted to be a little bit, not go quite as all in on, but, I highlighted, he has one feisty Matoli, who I highlighted for my blog. That's been pretty nice. And yes, we've talked about the Pavels before. And I highlighted one of those on my blog. She still hasn't debuted. I can't remember what her name is. I think it's Lovin' the Pavels, actually, is her name. Half to a stakes winner for Redham. So, and yes, the bravazos. I think he's going to be a racehorse sire. He's not going to be commercial. He's not going to get, the brilliant 2-year-olds most likely, but I'm really curious to see how they come out.
Let's start off, Jessica. I think sometimes people kind of confuse. There's different ways to go with pedigree handicapping, and sometimes there's pedigree handicapping versus pedigree analysis. And maybe you can kind of give a quick 30-second elevator pitch. What's pedigree handicapping, which you do a little bit of, but some of your more private services is more what I call pedigree analysis.
Yeah, pedigree handicapping is how is this horse going to run today? And it's really only useful if the horse is a first time starter or doing something new. Whereas pedigree analysis is a lot more in depth, how a longer term projection, how is this horse is going to do in the future? What is the ceiling for this horse type of thing?
So good distinction. And when you look at handicapping, I'm glad you mentioned kind of the first. So that's what I want to talk about here is sire analysis. And a lot of times, one of the things is the sires get a lot of the talk in pedigree handicapping, mainly because, some of them will have anywhere from 150 to 250 foals a year versus a mare can only have one foal a year. And they may only have 8 or 9, foals total for a lot of mares.
Yeah, exactly. The sample size is a lot bigger with stallions, so it's a lot easier to pick out patterns among them. And that's where it's good for things like, okay, is this a turf sire? What's his percentage of turf winners? What's his percentage of 2-year-old or first time starter winners or synthetic or routing or sprinting and things like that?
Well, let's talk about some more sires. So what I've brought up here is elite power. So when you look at the past performances, people see the sire, then they see the dam, and then I noted the broodmare sire. Some people that's a new term to them. But when we look at a sire, in this case, in the past performances, what are some of the things that, even in a horse that's run, I think it's more important maybe with first-time starters, first-time turf, first-time going a distance. But when you quickly see a sire, is there some things kind of spinning around in your head that you start to think about as you're going to handicap the racehorse that's running that day?
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of that again goes if you're really for looking at like first time starters and things, but something that even if you're not familiar really with the sires in particular, like maybe you don't know who Curlin is, but what you can look at is that $225,000 right next to him, and know that whoever Curlin is, people are spending a lot of money to breed to him because it costs $225,000 to breed to him. So that's a really good starting point, just quality wise, to look at. But then you're also, most of us, I think most of the people watching will at least know who Curlin is and know that Curlin is a really elite sire, no pun intended, one who can get any kind of horse.
So pedigree handicapping, I kind of noted a few things I wanted to I got some screen grabs of some blood horse sire lists we're going to be taking a look at in a few minutes here. But when I'm handicapping, what I call pedigree handicapping, I'm looking for these 3 things, like the first time they run on the turf, first time that they're running on an off track, and the first time they're going a distance, which for me is, a mile or longer. I think that's the general, a mile or longer is what people consider a little bit of a distance thing. Is there anything else that you're looking for when you're looking at first times for sires?
No, that would pretty much cover it. Just those, and then first time starters would basically be the times that I'm paying attention to things like the sire and dam and the pedigree in general.
So today I brought up, here is Irish War Cry, and he is by Curlin, and this is a progeny that actually ran today at Tampa Bay Downs. And I think a lot of people don't realize there's a lot of information out there. Like this is from the Twin Spires app. And if you've got an account for every horse that's running at any track in the country, you can click on the horse and get some of this information. And I think sometimes people think that, either a lot of this information is really hard to get to, or they just don't know where to find it. Like, here's an example: Irish War Cry. And, he's had 2 crops, 103 foals. But look at, you're already starting to see some patterns with mud winners, first time on the turf, first start winners. Are these things that you kind of look at, or do you have kind of some of your own things that you like to look at that, maybe you keep track of as well?
Yeah, absolutely. This would be, like the thing that's standing out here to me is the fact that he gets 41% 2-year-old winners, but only just over 6% first time out. So he's getting horses that are running at 2, but not necessarily firing right out of the gate. But yeah, that big percentage of mud winners there. It'd be interesting to see the sample size on these, because sometimes, especially with the sire who, you see he has only 49 foals, only 26 winners. Is that a sample size of 26, or is that a sample size of 8 and he has 1 of 8? So those are things that would make the information more helpful. But even just here, you can kind of take a look see that okay, first time turf, again, it depends on the sample size. Is that 1 in 20? Either way, first time turf, they're not really doing so great, but they can run on turf. So see, he has 2 turf winners, so probably one of them won first out, and the other one won later on the turf. But this is definitely the kind of information that you want to be looking at and taking into account and considering.
This is a little bit hard to show, but I pulled up. This is from Blood Horse, and one of the things they have is some of the different sire lists. And this is for 2023. This is turf sires. And you see, they have all of the years going back. So you can look at 2022, 2021. And one of the things I think a lot of pedigree handicappers will notice is that there's just certain turf sires that are in the top 10 every single year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, English Channel at the top there is absolutely one of them. Those American Pharaohs have been running great on the turf. And I mean, look at the percentages in particular of black type horses to runners for like English Channel and Warfront. And these are from very solid sample sizes too for most of these stallions. So this is definitely a really useful resource to see if a stallion is performing with his turf horses, and these are usually sorted by progeny earnings. So this is also showing you whether they're getting high class turf horses.
More Than Ready. He's been a horse for many years. I think people have known as a good turf sire. And
yeah,
Clinton's Joy, now deceased, but he was kind of the king of the American turf sires that, again, he had a lot of turfers, and a lot of them, one of the things they did well was marketing with naming them all kittens.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, when you get Kitten's Joy and English Channel together in a pedigree, watch out, because that horse is going to be a runner and they're going to run on turf.
A horse that hasn't had a lot of foals, mainly because the farm doesn't, they kind of limit the sire books a little bit, is Warfront. So I don't think he's got as big of a name among handicappers, but he does have he's got some high-end turfers.
Yeah, and he absolutely should be one of your go-to turf horses if you're thinking turf influence. And I mean, certainly for breeders, he's one of the go-to. You see that $100,000 2024 fee is there for a reason.
Not This Time is kind of a younger sire. He's had a few crops hit the track. Overall, what do you kind of, as you start to see some of these crops develop and some of the runners try different things, how are you right now with Not This Time? Do you think he's going to continue to be among the sires, or is this, kind of just dependent on his different crops?
Oh, he's absolutely going to only get better, I think, because he's one of those stallions who didn't start out as a horse who had real lofty expectations. He was a really good 2-year-old, but lightly raced, kind of never really got to show exactly what he was made of. I don't remember what he started out at, what his stud fee was when he retired offhand, but he wasn't retiring. Like, it wasn't like Flightline, who was getting who's going to get the best mares his first crop that he could possibly get, he will ever get in his career, most likely. Whereas Not This Time, his first foals only started racing a few years ago, and he's going to get the best mares the year that his foals started winning. So the best is yet to come for Not This Time. And the fact that he's been getting turf horses makes a lot of sense, because even though he himself was a dirt horse, he was a son of Giants Causeway.
American Pharaoh, he's had some runners in Japan. He's had some runners in Europe. I think there's still a chance for, I mean, he's had some good turf runners in the United States as well. But I think, you know, for the first couple of years, a lot of his runners were in Europe, and maybe some of the American racing fans didn't see that. But he's had some good runners in international competition.
Yeah, he definitely has. I think he's a little underrated, honestly, at this point in his career. I mean, he was never going to be the what did he retire for, 150,000 or something, you know, but that $50,000 fee seems about where I expect him to remain. You know, he gets pretty consistent runners. He has quite a number of grade 1 winners. I did a trivia thing recently that'll come out on Trust the Profits, where one of the questions was it was like identify the false statement, and I put in there American Pharaoh has more grade 1 winners than Munnings, assuming that people would think it was false when it is actually true, which I actually found surprising, because Munnings is such a high class sire. But American Pharaoh's been getting classy runners.
Here is a list of synthetic leaders. So kind of similar to turf, but you know, we've got Turfway Park is running now. You've got Presque Isle Downs. Gulfstream Park is running a couple of synthetic races today. Again, this is another free tool that you can select. They call it all weather, but anything surprising here from what you see from the top 10 for 2023?
Nothing real surprising here. You'll see that there is a lot of stallions sitting in Ontario, because they're going to be the ones who are having horses racing at Woodbine and getting the purses at Woodbine to bring them up here. Definitely worth noting that both Hardspun and his son Reload are in the top 5 here. Definitely seems like a sire line there that's going to be doing well. You see Kitten's Joy. The kind of general rule of thumb is that turf horses generally do better on synthetic than dirt horses. So seeing him there kind of makes some sense. Definitely a statistic that I think is going to become more and more relevant with time.
Will be interesting to follow Kara Knighty, just because, you know, the turf mile, that was one of my more favorite Breeders' Cup turf miles, and he's gotten some good turfers, and maybe he can roll that into some synthetic runners.
Oh yeah, he is one of the best value stallions in Kentucky right now, and just an incredible pedigree on him. He has some really, really predictable results when going back to King Mambo, because which is just line breeding to his tail female line, and that's getting into stuff that doesn't matter for handicappers necessarily, but you know, basically inbreeding to his third dam, who is Miesk, who is the dam of King Mambo. So yeah, I love Karakanti. He's great value in Kentucky right now.
One of the things we look at with pedigree handicapping, and I think you've written about this a little bit, and you see it in different pedigree columns, and even sometimes with just reading different people's picks, is it's what's referred to as a win early sire or a win early family. What does that kind of mean versus a late developing type runner?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much exactly what it says on the tin. The win early types are the ones who are going to win earlier in their career, who are going to come out running as 2-year-olds and win, whereas a later developing pedigree is one that you might have to wait until a little later in their 3-year-old season before you see the best of them. An example of that, you know, that I'm really interested to see next year is Disarm, since Gunrunner himself was a really good early season 3-year-old, but he really came into his own later in that 3-year-old season and on into his 4-year-old season. So I think that a horse like Disarm is really interesting going into a 4-year-old season next year.
Gunrunner, of course, you know, he got some big crops coming up here. He's got 2 or 3. He's going to have, you know, 2 or 3 really big crops. His first one with Disarm, and then he's got a bunch of 2-year-olds this year. I think he seems to have been well received because he did put together a pretty solid 4-year-old campaign, but even just with Winchell and Asmussen's connections as well, I think a lot of times people don't realize that some horses are just going to get a better chance to succeed early on, but then after that, they kind of have to produce the foals.
Exactly. That's a really big thing. Like I keep saying, like if Flightline doesn't get a champion, maybe not a champion, but a graded stakes winner, multiple graded stakes winners in his first crop, it'll be a shock because he's getting the best mares. He's getting every chance to succeed. And, then you also have different farms just kind of take different philosophies. If a horse is standing at Spendthrift Farm, that horse is going to get a large book of mares, which gives them a better chance of getting one of those top horses that a stallion needs early on in their career in order to then attract more mares of quality later on. And then you have horses, where they've failed because despite that, a horse like the market kind of dictates whether a stallion is a success or not, just as much as, whether they're getting winners, they need to have them early. You have a horse like Accelerate, who's now retired at the Kentucky Horse Park. His first crop are 3, but he just wasn't getting fast horses, even though they were really never going to be early season 2-year-olds. If you can't get them, you're not cut out for a stallion career, certainly not in Kentucky.
Well, and Accelerate was kind of like his sire. Looking at Lucky was a lot of the same traits.
Yeah, exactly. Like Looking at Lucky was a really great 2-year-old, but he went on well at 3. But he was pretty underrated by the commercial market. He's a stallion who, he isn't standing in the US in 2024 because he just wasn't getting flashy type horses. He got Accelerate. He's gotten stakes winners. He gets winners. He gets a great percentage of winners. But you need those big, flashy types of horses to really put you on the map as a sire.
So here is a list. I think, one of the things I like to do as a handicapper is I kind of keep a list of horses that run their faster speed figures going, in bigger races and 1.25-mile races. And so this is just kind of my personal list of stamina influences. Some of these are ones from the past, like Buck Passer, Tis Now, Street Cry, Curlin, Unbridled there for a few years, got a few runners. AP Indy, I think, is one that's pretty well known. What do you think of, I think I put 3 kind of at the top of the list as a question mark, wanted to get your opinion. Bernardini had a lot of good mares, a lot of high-priced horses. How do you think he kind of evolves here as a stamina influence?
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely pretty much agree with your list here. And I mean, Bernardini as a son of AP Indy is going to kind of continue that on. You're seeing a lot more of him on the bottom of pedigrees as the sire of mares than, in the direct sire line, but he can still definitely be a stamina influence, but he still brings some brilliance. He's not, not a plotter by any means. And then, a lot of times, like Arcangelo with Arrogate. And this is one where, looking at the female family is also going to give you some insight there. Knowing that Arcangelo, his third dam produced 2 Belmont Stakes winners and 2 other stakes winners at 1.5 miles or longer, kind of gives you a key there that, combined with Arrogate, whose best races came at 1.25 miles, that horse was probably going to thrive going the 1.5 miles of the Belmont Stakes.
Any thoughts on Dialed In at all?
I don't have a strong opinion on Dialed In. He's certainly not a horse that I think of as a sprint sire, but I can't think of any of his offspring off the top of my head except for Gunnevera, to be honest with you. So I don't have a really informed opinion about him.
What made Giants Causeway, it seemed like he had some classy horses. I think a lot of people still think of Turf, but he had some nice dirt horses and, of course, his great Breeders' Cup Classic run. But, they called him the Iron Horse just from some of the things that he did on the track, but he was well received as well at the sales and in the breeding shed.
Yeah, see, that was a little bit before I started really following the sport. Giants Causeway was already pretty much established by the time I started following the sport. So I can't really comment on, the thoughts at the time. But certainly nowadays, he's an influence that you love to see in pedigrees. He comes from a really deep female family, which is something that I focus on a lot in my analysis with that mare Mariah Storm. And, being a son of Stormcat, who is still one of the most prominent sire lines being carried on by Into Mischief, who is absolutely everywhere nowadays.
Let's talk about the mare. And this is where you do a lot of your analysis for pedigree analysis. But, a mare can only have one foal a year. And so one of the things that I like to look at is, did the mare win early? How many foals does she have? How many foals to winners? What surface did they run on? What are some of the things that you're looking for when you analyze a mare, when you look at the mare in a past performances?
Yeah, those are absolutely the first things I'm going to look at are, does she have the winners to foals and first time starters winners or 2-year-old winners, along with then, if looking at the surface and the sires that they were with. So, sometimes you have a mare who gets a really good horse from a pretty, mediocre stallion, or maybe just a regional stallion who isn't, top tier. And now you see that this mare has gotten a chance with a horse like Quality Road, Uncle Mo, Ghost Zapper, Curlin. And you can kind of expect that they're going to do just as well, if not better, with that upgrade in stallion quality. But for the most part, for handicapping, just being able to, say go on Equibase or using your ADW, look at a mare's produce, just straight up, what class of runners did she have and how did her best foals, where did they find their success?
So this is one again from today from Twin Spires, and this is getting back to the same horse. And so the mare, she's had 3 foals. She's had 2 of them start, 1 winner. And then, even things like turf winners to starters, dirt winners to starters. So even on this one mare, it's limited information. You're never going to have a big sample size, but these are kind of, I think what you're trying to do is put together a puzzle. I think sometimes when you're doing pedigree handicapping, it's a little bit more narrative driven than maybe like speed figures. It's all about the numbers. But I think what I like about pedigree handicapping is me and you could look at the same mare and really kind of form 2 different opinions, yet even sometimes get to the same result or the same selection.
Yeah, exactly. Like looking at this mare, knowing absolutely nothing else. I want to see this horse going at least about a mile on the turf, with that average winning distance. The one winner won at an average distance of about a mile, and it was on the turf. Neither of her dirt starters or winners. They didn't win it too. I'm kind of looking for a horse that's maybe this probably isn't a horse that I'm going to bet first time out going 6 furlongs on the dirt.
One of the things, this has just kind of been, talk about how a lot of the grade 1 winners, especially in the United States, I think it's a little bit better in Europe and Japan, but a lot of times they're not the greatest producers. A lot of times you've got to dig a little bit further back to get, it just seems like overall some of these grade 1 race winners don't end up being the best producers as, just when for the number of them out there, they don't seem to produce a lot of grade 1 winners themselves. Any reason why, or is that just one of those handicapping things that handicappers may notice, but maybe the breeders don't take a look at that type of thing?
Yeah, I wouldn't really say that that's necessarily a pattern per se. Federico Tessio had a theory that related to just vitality. It was kind of vague terms, but basically his theory was that a mare only has so much vitality in her, and if she uses all of that on the racetrack, then she's not going to have it to pass on to her offspring. Which in actual genetic terms, there could be like an epigenetic factor there, but realistically, studies have shown that racing class of the mare is the highest indicator of success as a producer. So overall, but there definitely are very famous, grade 1 winners who weren't great producers. But I think that has to do with other factors, not the fact that they were a grade 1 winner. For instance, Zenyatta hasn't been a very good producer. But I think that's less to do with the fact that she is a grade 1 winner and more to do with the fact that she was a grade 1 winner without any speed. So, and speed seems to be a highly heritable trait. What made Zenyatta great was her mental fortitude and her big bounding stride. So that isn't being passed on as much with her, which could just be, just the way the dice have rolled for her. But, whereas a horse like Rachel Alexandra, she only had 2 foals, but both of them were winners, and she had a really nice high class winner, but she was a much speedier mare than Zenyatta. So I think that's really something that tends to be a little more correlated with it than necessarily just racing class.
Talk about nicks. This is something that I think people look at. And I found this stat. Danzig with Mr. Prospector mares, 53 runners, 16 of them, 30% of them were stakes winners.
Now that is
the
an
total
insane
sample
nick.
size was 178. So this is one of the more famous nicks of all time.
Yeah, no, that is an insane nick. And I mean, nicking has been a thing going back into the early to mid 19th century with horses such as Hampton and Galopin, who might have even been earlier than that. But nicks are basically the cross of a sire line with daughters of another stallion or his sons. So it's a really useful tool in a breeder or a handicapper's toolbox, but it's certainly a reductive way of looking at a pedigree, of course. There's no guarantee what combination of genes are getting passed on, but it's a good starting point and something to look at. Like one of my favorite nicks is Speightstown with Medaglia d'Oro mares. That's a nick that I really like to see. Prince of Monaco is a modern, very recent example of it, but there's plenty of really great horses bred on that nick. Into Mischief with Distorted Humor mares, having Practical Joke, Life is Good. So there are definitely there are things worth looking at, but there's there's definitely other elements, especially in making breeding decisions, that I'm going to be looking at alongside nicks, and nicking systems are definitely a good tool though.
What's a good sample size before you'll start to form a little bit of an opinion?
I would say around 40 is where I start thinking like, okay, maybe there's a pattern here. Even, if there's a success rate of 1 in 4, I'm not going to go saying, oh, this is a great nick. This is an emerging nick. But it is something where, if I have a mating and it's going to be repeating that, then sure, I'll go for it, because I mean, that's just proof that it can work. It's not proof of any sort of pattern. But I'd say around like 40 to 50, if a nick is getting a higher percentage of stakes winners than like all starters with the stallion in the top half of the pedigree, then I start to be a little interested. If we got 8% stakes winners for a cross of Into Mischief over something like Into Mischief over Tiz, now I was looking at today, gets a little over 8% stakes winners, whereas Into Mischief overall is like 7.6% stakes winners or something. So it's something where I'm like, okay, this seems to be a pattern that works. It's not a huge, big difference, whereas like Into Mischief over Distorted Humor is like 20% stakes winners from a much smaller sample size. But yeah, I'm rambling. Sorry.
No, that's interesting, because I think sometimes people, especially with handicapping, if you wait too long for the sample size, your prices are going to go down. Now,
Exactly.
from an analysis standpoint and analyzing a catalog, that's different. But I think sometimes as handicappers, if you see a quick little pattern, I think sometimes you can catch a price if you kind of just go with it.
Yeah, there's a lot of instinct with it, I think, that doesn't get talked about a lot. And even with like pedigrees, a lot of times, everybody is seeing, oh, hey, Gunrunner got Preakness Stakes winner early voting out of a Tisnow mare. Sure, there's only 4 starters on the cross to date, but what if we just start doing that? What if we send him more so a nick can kind of perpetuate itself in that way, where we get one really good horse on the cross and breeders are going to try and imitate that cross. So just naturally, the stallion is going to have more opportunities for that cross to succeed. So they can kind of self-perpetuate in that way.
So one of the things I wanted to mention was a few pedigree tools. I know some of these you use, or at least you're aware of. One good source is the American Produce Records from Brisnet. Unlimited access. It's a subscription, $275 a year. You can basically analyze, 3 million foals, 1 million dams, auction prices, a lot of information with the American Produce Records.
Yeah, definitely. I unfortunately don't have it myself, but definitely the best official source of that kind of information.
And then another source is from Equine Line, the Mare Produce Records. Again, you can see all of their foals. You can see prices. And what's nice about both of these is they have kind of clickable links. So you can then, kind of, how that goes. You find yourself going down a rabbit hole and 2 hours later, you're like, what did I do?
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Definitely a good way to do that.
Anything else that you use for pedigree handicapping or a tool that you might recommend for people if they want to do some pedigree handicapping, not so much on the analysis side?
Yeah, the best free tool for pedigree handicapping is just equineline.com's. You can look up a mare's produce without the subscription, but it's convoluted. You have to run a blank horse search without a name, and then you'll get an option at the bottom that says search by name of dam and year of birth. And then you can type in the name of the dam. And from there, you can view all of her offspring that have made a start or a work in North America. So it's not quite as, it's not worldwide like the Equine Line or the Brisnet things, but it'll give you a really good starting point. And then if you want to go a little bit deeper, but don't want to get too in the weeds, pedigreequery.com is essentially the Wikipedia of pedigree. So you have to double check a lot of your information on there, particularly regarding like race records. But it's a really good, easy source to kind of, if you want to start digging into pedigrees a little bit, it's a good source for that.
We're going to take some questions. We do have a question here. Sometimes horses outrun their pedigrees. Do you ever take that into account in your notes or when analyzing pedigrees? Just heart,
Yes.
Some people call it grit. Some people call it heart. I guess depends on your term. Feistiness.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something I take into account. This is one of the reasons that I really liked Flame Away as a sire. It's one of the reasons I like Bolt d'Oro as a sire, is because both of them were horses that showed a lot of tenacity, a lot of grit, a lot of heart in their races. And it's one of the reasons I'm really looking forward to McKinsey as a sire next year for 2-year-olds, because that kind of competitive spirit, so to speak, that mental aspect does seem to be heritable, at least to a certain degree.
Any more questions? We'll see. Richard said Zenyatta had one last foal. Now, is that a 2-year-old this year or is that a 3-year-old?
I'm not sure. I think she has a baby younger than that. But I'm not sure. I always wanted to see her with the Warfront. I was really upset when that Warfront filly passed away, because that is a pedigree angle that I love, is that family as Warfront very distantly. And I did a post about this on my blog, where Warfront has 40 starters as of the time I looked at it, which was, I don't know, March, April. But he had 40 starters from his own female family. Of those, there were 4 grade 1 winners, and over 25%. I'd have to look it up. Never mind. He had a huge percentage of stakes winners from his own female family compared to his overall percentages, which was something that was really interesting. And that's a really big deep dive topic that I talk about a lot on my blog, but it's something that's a pretty interesting thing, and a reason I really wish I could have seen that Zenyatta filly by Warfront.
Final question. Do you look at the broodmare sire for hidden grass or hidden turf type pedigree when you're looking at the sire? Do you also look at the broodmare sire?
Oh yeah, definitely. Especially if you don't have the time to really dig deep into the mare herself. Looking at the broodmare sire is a great shortcut there. And yeah, no, if you see, if horses out of an English channel or a Kitten's Joy mare, that horse might just be a grass horse, you know?
Well, great talking again, Jessica. Let's kind of recap here. So now you've got the Hawkstone bloodstock. You're doing some stallion research. You maybe go into the sales. If anybody wants to get a hold of you for your services, or what's the best way to find you social media wise?
Yeah, on Twitter at starryday93 is generally the best way to get in touch with me. You can also email me at jessica@littlebluebirdstables.com. I'm content manager for Little Bluebird Stables, and we're just getting into the breeding side of things there. We have a opportunity now to buy a 2020 shares in a 2025 foal, and I'll be leading the that whole expedition there for Little Bluebird Stables. So anyone who's interested in that can reach out via that email or just on Twitter.
Well, thanks for joining us again tonight, Jessica, talking about pedigrees, pedigree handicapping, some of the things you look at. You can follow her at starryday93 on Twitter, and also just search Hawkstone Bloodstock and subscribe to the Substack. And you can either get a paid subscription, or she also does free posts as well. That's going to do it for our pedigree handicapping show tonight with Jessica Tugwell.